changing conditions, simply to the nature of terms and conditions. So we as an association ask BLM Nevada to please figure out tools where we can have some flexibility and be able to adapt to changing conditions, not only drought, but good years when there's a pretty good flush of cheatgrass as well. And so they've done that, and we're proud of them for it. It was a big ask and a big lift, but Catherine, Dyer at the state level and all your districts at the district level have afforded us tools to do that, and that's why we're here, is to learn about them. I would ask you to make this a productive meeting. We're going to try to go from today forward, and so tailor your questions or comments that you have from today forward would be great. With that, John Raby, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, John. Yeah, my name is John Raby. I'm the state director for the Bureau of Land Management in Nevada, and I want to thank John Griggs and the entire Nevada Cattlemen's Association for their great work that they've been doing over many, many years. And these have been conversations that I know we've had about flexibility and wanting to make sure that we're all operating with the same level of understanding, because, you know, everyone's job is hard. You know, it takes a lot of effort to work through a term permit renewal and then have to make that operate on the ground in a way that responds to many changing conditions, not only throughout the year, but across the years, right? And so we know that our processes in the federal government can be somewhat, they can be difficult at times. They can be bureaucratic, quite frankly. And the effort here with this workshop is to help demystify the process, and so that everybody has a good understanding of what implementation of flexibility can look like, how you would go through that process, and to at the end of the day have something that can be authorized and work on the ground. And Catherine Dyer has done an amazing job of putting together a presentation that she's going to go through to really lay this out, and I think a very understandable way for all of us who you know, don't you know, every single day have to work through the nuances of whether it's the grazing regulations or the terms and conditions of a permit. So we want to keep it straightforward, simple, flexible, adaptive, and to look for ways to solve problems and to make those solutions happen on the ground. So, you know, we as John said, we want to think of things as we're moving forward, be very solution-minded, solution-oriented, and find ways to you know, make things work, so that as we're you know, already dealing with a lot of complexity, that we can help to simplify it. And this is a first step in helping to do that and getting everybody up to a same level of understanding. So with that, you know, Megan, I want to say thanks to you for helping facilitate all of this. You've done a greght job at all of the sessions so far. So you know, big shout out to you for the work you've done in Ely and Elko and Winnemucca, and I will turn it back to you. So appreciate it.
Great, thanks, John. I appreciate it. I'm going to go through some introductions, allow everybody to turn on their mic and camera and introduce themselves and either what agency or ranch they are from. And as you saw, we are recording this. The point of this is, and I think of these meetings, hopefully in the future, this is a start. One of the things that we're really interested in is getting some feedback. And so thanks for sharing your emails with us. I'll be sending out a feedback form after this so that we can get a better understanding if this sort of format works, what other topics you might be interested in, and if this format doesn't work, if you have suggestions or solutions for that. So appreciate that. We'll do a round of introductions and then I'll turn it over to Catherine for the presentation. So I'll start out with Sierra, who is also with the department, and then I'll go to external folks.
Sorry, a little slow here. Sierra Russell, Public Information Officer for the Nevada Department of Agriculture.
All right, Greg Newby, sorry. Okay, I'll loop back. How about Leanna?
Hi, Progressive Rancher Magazine, Churchill County Farm Bureau Board member, and longtime Nevada Cattlemen Association member.
Great, thanks, Leanna. Cole?
Yeah, Cole Estelle. I'm a sheep rancher. I live in Winnemucca. My family runs sheep and cows in Gerlach area.
Great, thanks, Cole. AG?
A.G. Smith, Cottonwood Ranch up in the O'Neill Basin. It's snowing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, AG. Maggie?
Maggie Orr, Lincoln County Conservation District.
Thanks, Maggie. Doug? Busselman?
Doug Busselman, Nevada Farm Bureau.
Thanks, Doug. Jake?
Hi, Jake Tibbetts, Eureka County Natural Resources Manager, and I work very closely with a lot of grazing permittees and trying to find flexibility.
Great, thanks, Jake. Amber?
Amber Pike with the Lincoln County Conservation District.
Thanks, Amber. Appreciate you being here. Greg, try again. And maybe you're on the phone and you might need to, if you are on the phone, *6 to unmute. If not, we'll go back. Jack Alexander.
Jack Alexander, Synergy Resource Solutions, and I work with several ranchers in Nevada.
Great, thanks, Jake. Or Jack, for being here. Appreciate it. I see the Caliente field office. Do you guys want to unmute, or in the chat? I know you listed who is all in the room. Do you want to?
Hi, this is Leslie Jackson here. We have a few of the ranchers that came in attendance, and then we have 3 of our RMSs here as well.
Okay, so Mark Higby and Vaughn. Great. Okay, I can see everybody now. Perfect. Thanks all for attending. Alan Shepard.
Work there goes. Hello, everybody. Alan Shepard, Deputy State Director for Resources, Lands, and Planning at the Nevada State Office.
Thanks, Alan. Jason. Freeman.
Hello, Jason Freeman, Assistant Field Manager with the Wells Field Office.
Great, thanks. Amy.
Amy Halstead with Halstead Forestry Ranches out of Duckwater.
Great, thanks, Amy, for being here. Laurel.
Laurel Saito with the Nature Conservancy in Nevada.
Thanks for being here. Laria. I'm going to pronounce that. I butchered it. I know.
I'm Laria Lovick. I'm a range specialist with the Colorado State Office. Catherine was kind enough to let me invade.
Great, appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Thank you.
So I have a phone number 775-744-4284. Okay.
I think they muted themselves. I think they were previously unmuted.
Okay. You try *6 one more time.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, this is Mindy Sill with the Sill Ranch.
Thanks for participating. Appreciate it. And Greg, I noted that you don't have a mic or camera, so we'll make sure to have some pauses for you to put any questions that you might have into the chat. But thanks for being here. Did I miss anybody? Besides our presenter, which I was going to let her introduce herself once we got started. Great. Well, thanks everyone. And like I said, we'll move through the presentation. Catherine will take a short break in between the Drought EA and the targeted grazing, and have a pause for a little bit of questions. And then the reserve of the time this afternoon will be for question and answers. So take it away, Catherine, and I'll pull up your presentation while you introduce yourself.
All right, so thank you all for joining. And we really, like Megan said, really want to make this a dialogue at the end and have some good conversation. But with that in mind, don't hesitate to have questions along the way, please, as well. So I'm Catherine Dyer, and I'm the Nevada State Range Lead for BLM Nevada. I'm also the National Outcome-Based Grazing Initiative Lead for Headquarters BLM. And so I'm really coming to you from both of those perspectives today. And I know that the increase in flexibility is something that we all need and that honestly the land needs. And so we'll go through a couple of opportunities that we've developed in BLM Nevada. And I know we have some people from other states in this. The process will be the same regardless of the state, but many other states might not have the environmental assessments and tools that we'll be discussing today. So I just want to throw that out there up front as well. And so what we're going to talk about today are, what are these tools that we're referring to? They're certainly not tools that, that you would find in your garage, commonly thought of tools. So we'll discuss some tools that we have developed that should be useful to everyone. And then through this process, what does the permittee need to provide to make sure that they can, really expedite and initiate this process and, bring their best thoughts to the table? And then also, what can you expect from the BLM through this process, as well as general timelines? And we'll discuss timelines both for project development as well as for the decision timeline to get these projects on the ground. And so I think that EA might be the only acronym you'll hear today, so pretty proud of that. But the environmental assessments that we're going to discuss today have analyzed and disclosed a variety of drought actions and responses, as well as a variety of livestock responses to cheatgrass. And so those are the two, the two different components that we'll be discussing today. And also cooperative monitoring will just kind of be referenced throughout, because it's a really, it's a really important way that not only we can build our collaborative relationship and our dialogue of what we're seeing on the ground, but also it really helps provide capacity, and it helps confirm that we have the data to show the the impacts and legitimacy of these approaches. Go ahead.
Okay.
And so as a permittee, what can you provide to help, hit the ground running with your BLM office? And so you hear this all the time, but early contact, you really want to contact your range specialist as soon as possible to start the conversation. As we get into the time frame component, you'll see, how these timeframes can work. And so you don't want to be pressed for time at the very end trying to get through these processes. And then how can you collect information on both the concerns and the opportunities across the landscape, the allotments, whatever it is, whatever the size and component is that you're dealing with on the landscape. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can look at your permit and see whether the flexibility that you need to be able to address certain issues can be, whether the terms and conditions of your permit need to be modified in order to be able to accommodate some management modifications, or whether there's components that can be done within your current terms and conditions. And then work with BLM to build these solutions and above all, we're looking for ecological improvements and, reducing those ecological impacts. But we want, obviously, these have to be economically and, they have to be feasible for your operation as well. And understand any permit modification or project has management and monitoring requirements. And so we'll talk about those, as well as what you could contribute to make sure that, that those are able to be done and smooth. And with that, the cooperative monitoring. Go ahead. And so the expectations, this is what you can look forward to from the BLM office that you're working with. And collaborative project development is obviously something that we want all to be doing together. So that's something that you can expect to experience. The targeted and prescribed grazing has a specific application that's developed, and you can expect that once you've filled out that application and submitted it to your office, that you'll get a response within 15 days of submitting that. And that doesn't mean you'll have a project on the ground within 15 days. That means you'll have a meeting lined up and a path forward. And you can expect a rangeland management specialist with knowledge of this process, of these processes, to guide the process, and a line officer that's supportive of finding solutions, as well as a state office that's supportive whenever needed. Go ahead. Okay, and like I said, the timelines we'll be looking at is both the timeline for creating a project as well as the timeline for a decision. And I do want to emphasize that the first year is going to be the longest year for any of these. So, contact your range specialist accordingly. What we are going to be doing is whether it is through a modification of your permit that includes these projects as a term and condition available when the when the on the ground drought or cheatgrass conditions are, prompting that action, or whether it's a decision that, just allows for multiple years of this action. We're addressing these in a way where we don't have to create a decision every year that these projects are implemented. That decision process is really a first year process. And so the timeframes of subsequent years of putting these projects on the ground would be quicker than that first year would be. Go ahead. Okay, and so how do we use NEPA documents? And so, sorry, two acronyms, but the NEPA documents, the National Environmental Policy Act, directed the BLM to disclose our actions and the impacts of those actions publicly. And so we still have to do that here, but we have now these two NEPA documents that have analyzed and disclosed a variety of beneficial actions. And so now we don't have to redo those every time, we can just use them. And so what that means is that we'll need some on the ground data. And when I say data through this presentation, I don't mean, I don't mean like super time consumptive, really onerous quantitative data. Even observations and photographs are useful information and can help shape these projects. And so there's data needed. And then from that data, you see again what what issues and opportunities you have, and develop a project that would help. And so when I say project development, that's basically like the grazing modification, grazing plan, grazing project. And so you would develop that, those grazing modifications that would be, beneficial for either the drought or addressing cheatgrass. And then the determination of NEPA adequacy, the DNA, is the process that the BLM goes through in order to ensure that this project that we've collaboratively developed is in line with the analysis that was done in that in whichever NEPA document. And so after we've completed that process, then we would go ahead and issue a decision saying, that we are going to implement this this grazing modification, this project on the ground, and what the benefits of that would be. Go ahead. Okay. And so this is the general process for the permittee to initiate drought modifications. So now we've talked a little bit about just, the EA process in general. What we're going to talk about for the next few slides is going to be specific to the drought modifications. And so the first things that you'll need to do are have some on the ground observations. Again, the data, but that can be observational, photographic. Certainly want to capture in the next box where these needs and opportunities are across the landscape. We all know that with the mountain ranges and topography that we have throughout Nevada, we have a drought at the north end of the valley. Sometimes when there is, really robust grass growth in the south end of the valley, it can be that, that haphazard. And so across, again, the allotments, pastures, whatever the landscape is that you're managing on, you want to have a holistic view of that landscape in terms of where those needs are and where those opportunities are across the landscape. And then looking at the terms and conditions that are already included in your permit to see whether some of the changes that would be beneficial on the landscape might already be available for you. And if not, all of the components that we'll talk about today, through the decision process, we are able to work outside of, the date ranges and, mandatory terms and conditions that are on your permit currently. But, looking at that permit gives an idea of where we might need wiggle room, right? And then we would take a look at the document itself to see what options we have for responses that have already been analyzed. And that's what is available to us to work with. And you'll see there's quite a variety of them. And then after that process is complete, really writing up our ideas before we come to BLM so that we have, again, this is how you can help create some efficiency in the creation of these modifications, and writing up your plan that includes your data, why you think this is a good plan, where the needs and opportunities are, and how you've sought to balance those throughout your plan, and an idea of what terms and conditions in your permit might need to be modified in order to accomplish the plan, as well as then, some response actions that have been addressed through the Drought EA. Go ahead. And so you all received a variety of handouts from Megan in the email with this Zoom link, and these will be two of the handouts that you received. These are observation summary forms that we are using internally in BLM Nevada, that we've developed through the last many years of drought. And so we feel as though they're very complete for our internal uses to prompt, to prompt the thought process and the data collection on things that someone might not have thought of in the field, so that we all are writing down the same observations. So you're more than welcome to use these data observation forms. Sorry. In case anyone doesn't know, I fell sick today, and so I'm doing this from home, and that's not ideal, but thank you all for for suffering through it with me. And so these are yours to use if you would like to, or they can give you a good idea at least of some of the components that you can take, that you can write your observations down on any other piece of paper that you would like. Go ahead. Okay, and so as you're out there with these forms or whatever, the questions that you're going to want to be asking yourself are, you know, what conditions do you see across that landscape that need to be addressed? And we'll get a little more into that. And what are the opportunities you see to improve the situation? And how is the proposed change going to benefit the land? Again, all of these EAs were written with that reducing the ecological impacts as that first and foremost need. And then the benefits to the livestock operation and the reduction of impacts to the livestock operation are a benefit through this process as well. And again, the photographs, do you have pictures of the conditions? Those can be very, very useful. And if you're taking pictures of like a grass species to show how much it's grown or not grown that year, having something next to it with a ruler or your boot or whatever that can give a size reference is helpful also. And then again, thinking of your desired time frame, there's some time frames that we are going to have to adhere to through this, but there's also the potential, maybe your turnout is in March and there's not the capability to get a project implemented by that time, but maybe your next pasture move is in May and there's the ability to have it on the ground by then. And worst case scenario, front loading these so that if there's not an adequate time frame to get a project on the ground this year, then there's still the ability to go through that modification process and then have that project ready in really short order for subsequent years. Go ahead, Megan. Okay, so this is just want to look at a general permit here. And so you can see up top, we have what's called our mandatory terms and conditions. And these include the number of livestock, the allotment that the livestock are in, the type of livestock, the begin date, the end date, and the total AUMs. And these are things that we are able to work around. And so when we say season of use change, we can start and end completely outside of our mandatory terms and condition timeframe if that's the beneficial approach to have. And so again, knowing what these are, but not feeling like they're limiting your ability to move forward with other potentially beneficial timeframes, locations. I do also want to mention that term and condition that's just below that first row of stars. It says grazing use will be in accordance with the June 19th notice of full force and effect decision. If you have any term and condition like that in your permit, there's terms and conditions that you must operate according to an AMP perhaps, or an FMUD, final multiple use decision. And so just keep an eye on those other terms and conditions as well. And if you do have another document referenced, then if you don't have that already, you'll need to get that from your local BLM office so that you can look through that as well. Sometimes they give more flexibility and sometimes they're a bit more restrictive. Go ahead. And then I did want to go ahead as well and bring attention, if you have a term and condition like this very top one that says the monitoring data will be evaluated on an annual basis to determine if management objectives are met and so forth, then that one, I just want to caution people that does not give carte blanche ability quite like it might appear to. And this is something that as the national outcome-based lead, these are honestly terms and conditions that are one of the reasons that, outcome-based grazing came along, because we'll monitor and adjust, nebulously stated, has historically not had strength in court. And so I just want to give that caution that if you see that term and condition, it doesn't necessarily give the ability to, to make large changes. Okay. So we've compiled all of the drought EAs. I will mention that each district has its own environmental assessment. And so be sure to look at the environmental assessment for the district that you are, managing in. They're all very similar, but they do have a few little nuances that you're going to want to make sure you do get your specific EA. And so Megan has gone to the site here so you guys can see what it looks like. And then we'll scroll down, and on the right, we have all of these drought EAs available, and just pick one, Megan, whichever. So you pick which one you want, and then it will take you to this e-planning site where all of the maps and component documents for that particular environmental assessment are housed. And so you can see she's on the left there of the screen with the documents and maps. And so if she goes into documents there, then you'll see the variety of documents that, that you would access through this location. And so the very top one, the Winnemucca Drought District Response Plan EA, would be the one that you would want to look at. However, for these drought EAs, we've compiled some cheat sheets for you guys to help make this a little more approachable as well. Okay. Thank you, Megan. Next slide. Okay. And so all of these EAs, like I said, they all have some nuances, but they're all substantially the same in that they all have a purpose of analyzing this variety of responses in order to allow quick responses to drought. And so the goal of being able to be proactive, knowing that we have recurring droughts throughout this state and that those impacts are not consistent from year to year, but frequently need to be able to be addressed. And so again, these documents were all created with the intention of allowing those, analyzing those responses to allow for some quick modifications to alleviate those negative impacts to a resource that's already stressed from drought. Go ahead. So all of the drought EAs have drought indicators and drought triggers and drought responses. And a drought indicator is just basically like, how do I know I'm in drought, right? And so in the BLM, we use the US Drought Monitor and to a lesser extent, the Vegetation Drought Response Index to help give a broad scale look at where the biggest concerns might lie so that we can prioritize our limited staff time to go to those locations and see what the conditions are on the ground. For you guys, I would expect that you would probably start off with the field visits, and really those would be those field visits documenting the status of forage and water availability, and those would be the drought indicators. And we'll talk more about that. And so the drought triggers, so basically your indicators are forage and water, but then the triggers are like how much forage and how much water means that we need to respond to it, right? And so the water availability in this case does not mean is water present. It means is water present in the amount and the quality that is needed to service the amount of livestock that are there, as well as the wildlife resources that are present. And so that I'm sure you guys have seen times where water might be available, but it's not, the spring is not running as much as it does in normal years, and there's the potential for it not to be running at all later. And being proactive on that water availability, certainly don't wait until the water is gone to worry about it. And the very bottom one you'll see is the plant production and or drought stress. And so that kind of goes hand in hand with the utilization that you see in the middle of this page. Obviously, when plants don't grow as much, then we use that biomass quicker, right? Because there's not as much of it to use. And so there are years where plant production may be greatly diminished, and we want to be able to change our action accordingly, right? As well as the utilization and stubble height. When you see these numbers, that does not mean that at 25 or 30% that removal is necessary. It means that at 25 or 30%, as outlined here, we need to have our next action already ready to go so that we're not just thinking about it when we get to this point. So again, it's a trigger for an action, but we have the ability to help shape those actions as we develop these projects. Go ahead. And so speaking of actions, and now in the in-person ones, I had everyone look at these while we were going through them, but you'll see them on the next page. One of your handouts is a 5-page handout that has all of the drought response indicators, the drought response triggers, and the drought response actions. Just so we cut and paste that out of the relevant district EA and just made that little cheat sheet that I was referring to. And so you can reference that to see which one or multiple drought response actions might be most beneficial for the concerns that you're looking at, as well as, take into account any opportunities that you have on your landscape to be able to modify the grazing accordingly. And so this can be things like changes in season of use. Again, that can be completely outside of the terms and conditions of your regular grazing permit. So you could think of that like one that is very common is to change from a growing season use where where there's a concentrated impact on riparian resources and on the upland resources as well during that drought time, and then to modify that to more of a dormant season of use during droughts. There's also the potential to reduce grazing duration, to change livestock management practices, and that could be herding, that could be supplementation. You'll see at the bottom of the page, I also wrote virtual fencing is an option. We're very excited about how far that technology has come, and although it is not, although it is still growing, it has become available and useful now, and we're very supportive of exploring. So certainly let your range specialists know if you have any interest in exploring virtual fencing. Fencing of critical areas. So that would be like a temporary electric fence around maybe a riparian resource or some other critical area. There is the ability
So I think we lost Catherine. Is she frozen for everyone else as well?
Yeah, she is, Megan.
Okay. We'll give her just a minute if you guys can be patient. Or John, do you
ability to do targeted grazing of invasive? Am I back?
You are back now.
You are back.
Okay, I'll just leave my video off and see if that helps. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Catherine.
And sure. So the targeted grazing, really just concentrating use in those already disturbed annual grass areas. Changes in kind or class of livestock. This is available, though we recognize that is, a heavy lift for an operation to do. So recognize that's not going to be available to everyone according, to the impacts it would have to your operation. Water hauls and above ground pipelines. I will mention that water hauls we are able to do for longer than 30 days through this mechanism. And so it could be, it could be for however long it's needed on that.
Must be snowing in Washoe Valley. Hopefully. Give it just a minute. So she dropped off. Maybe she'll, Sierra, can you make sure to look for her in the waiting room if she signs back in? John, do you want to take a 5-minute break, or what would your preference be?
Yeah, I think just taking 5 minutes and letting Catherine join back up, that'd probably be a good idea. I know the technology, we got to be adaptive on this stuff. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and do that, Megan?
Okay, we'll come back at 3:50 then, and I'll send Catherine a note too. Okay, John?
That sounds great. Appreciate
All
it.
right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Kat.
Okay. Hi, sorry. Did you cover it all for me, Megan?
No, we decided to just take a 5-minute pause. So
Oh, okay.
I'm
sorry. I don't know. It's gorgeous here.
Okay.
But-
Well, I told everybody, so they're probably doing bio breaks and stuff. So at 3:50, we'll just start back up. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say no stress at all, Catherine. I know you're not feeling well and you're going through this like a trooper, and I know it's acting up, but don't stress over it. It's no big deal. We'll figure it out.
Hey. Okay. Hey.
Okay, so we're going to try, she's calling in and we'll use phone audio. And then she has a copy of the presentation. So if she, we're gonna try it this way. So she's dialed in now. Is that correct, Catherine? *6 to unmute.
Okay, well, I figure I am dialed in, but I have turned my volume down on the phone and I just have it ready in case I do lose service again. So thank you all for suffering through technology with me. Okay, so water hauls, I think, is what we were at. Look for more as opposed to less. You could have 10 water hauls, let's say, authorized across the landscape and maybe just use 2 at any given point. But have those additional ones available, recognizing, of course, water hauls are contingent on roads being passable and all of that. Above ground pipelines are also available. And one thing to remember with those is that those would require, so if you're using municipal water for a water haul, you don't have to do anything with any water rights. However, if you're doing an above ground pipeline from a location where you have a water right with a beneficial place of use at that location, then you have to file with the state engineer to change that location of beneficial use or to add additional locations of beneficial use. And so recognize that's a process and a time frame of its own. And then of course, there's always the ability to, not use portions or entire allotments, depending on how severe the drought impacts are and the partial reduction in AUMs. Next page. So these are the little cheat sheets that I mentioned earlier, and I've just highlighted all of the headers that you would be looking at, but this basically goes through the drought response indicators, triggers, and responses that have been analyzed through this EA. So it's just, again, your little cheat sheet as you're looking through modifications that could be beneficial on the landscape.
And I'll just add that there's one of these for each of the districts. So make sure that you're reviewing the material that's related to the district where you have your permits.
Yes, thank you. So I do want to remind everyone, we spoke about non-use, and what I want to remind everyone is that if you are not using all of your AUMs, to please apply for non-use so that it can be, so that we can show that at a national level. And what I mean is, when the Rangeland Administration System, that's RAS, that's our billing system, when it was first started, it was just a billing system, but through the years, it has evolved to really be almost a database. And so as you apply for non-use, and you'll see I circled that conservation and protection of public lands, and then I would encourage you to write in the empty space, maybe to the right of the, below that annual fluctuation of livestock operations. In that empty space, you could write in, is it drought? Is it horses? What is it on the landscape that is creating those conditions where you need to take non-use? And what we have the ability to do now in our billing system is, when we enter those AUMs of non-use, we also then have drop-down menus that become available, and we can select drought or horses, and that gives us the strength to show with those numbers that we, the BLM and the operators, are being responsive to whatever those conditions are on the landscape. And that gives us that strength of our story, right? And so we can say, we know that drought was very impactful this year, and see how many AUMs of non-use needed to be taken. Maybe it's in one district more than another, because again, drought impacts are not the same all over the state. And so please apply for non-use if you are not using all of your AUMs, so that we can really accurately capture that and tell that story. And I'll go ahead and say this has come up as a question in the live workshops in terms of, you know, there's always the worry, right? If you apply for a large amount of non-use AUMs at the beginning of the grazing year, and then maybe there's conditions that really improve through the year, would you be able to take those non-use AUMs, you know, out of non-use and make them active use AUMs again? And the answer is, if the conditions have changed, we can do that. But the better way to approach that would be, if you have drought impacts and there's some AUMs of non-use associated with those drought impacts, work with your range specialist to develop, you know, if you have an 8-month permit, maybe you take some amount of non-use and apply for the first 2 months of use, and then see what the conditions bring and work with your range specialist sort of in sequential chunks like that through the season, instead of applying for all your non-use right up front. However you do it, whether you do it up front or whether you do it sequentially, I really do encourage that everyone apply for any non-use that they are taking. Okay. And then, so once we've gotten our information together and created this plan, you know, to address the conditions that we're seeing, then again, we have this determination of NEPA adequacy worksheet that becomes available to us, since we already have these environmental assessments. And so this is basically BLM's internal process. Once we have that project or, you know, management modification created, then we internally in BLM go through and answer these pointed questions. There's 10 or 12 questions. I just put the first page up here, and these questions are, you know, they require us to specifically answer in a way that confirms that the project that we're bringing forward is within the scope of what was analyzed. So it's our confirmation that this environmental assessment is appropriate to use. Go ahead. So we will go ahead and stop there real quick. That is the main body of the drought component. And next we'll go into the targeted and prescribed grazing. But if anyone has thoughts or questions about the drought component specifically, we'd like to stop and entertain those. Yes, Leanna?
On the filing of the non-use, is that just for that particular season? And then you apply again the next season? So it's a continuous application of non-use?
Yes, non-use is, so ordinarily it would be done once a year. Okay. as you're planning your operation, but you could do it multiple times through that one season if you know, if your turnout is early enough that the year could change while you're out there, you know. But it does not, it's not a permanent, applying for non-use does not transcend years. So applying for non-use this year will be totally irrelevant next year.
Go ahead, John.
Catherine, thank you a bunch. I know this was a lot of work, not only for you, but for staff all the way to ground level. One thing I want to emphasize, this is our tool to use. It's not a tool that your district will ask you to use. It's our tool to use. And in the process, if it's protested, it will go back to your normal permit. It's not a thing that will penalize you. The other thing probably to add is that this would be an addendum to your term permit. So on your term permit where you have terms and conditions, you know, there's a section about might say about no salt or mineral close to live water. Whatever tool that you come up with that BLM works for on your behalf will be an addendum to your term permit permanently like that. So as Catherine said, the first year will be rough. You probably won't get it done the first year. It take several months probably for your range con to implement this for you, but then it potentially could be permanent after that. So any applicable year, you'd be able to use these tools with the cooperation of your range staff.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you, John, for bringing those up. Megan, is it possible to scroll back to the permit? I'm sorry. And so as Megan scrolls back to the permit, I'll say, so what John just mentioned is that, one more. Okay, so this kind of goes with Leanna's question and with John's statements. Nothing that we're going to do through this is going to change those mandatory terms and conditions. You won't lose AUMs or get AUMs through this. What you will have is, like John said, down in the other terms and conditions, you'll have a term and condition added to your permit that says, when drought conditions exist, this modified management plan will be available. And so, then it's immediately available anytime that confirmation of drought exists. And also, like John reminded us, and we'll go through this more in the decision process, but if we get appealed, if we lose, the worst case scenario is that we're not able to put these actions on the ground. And when that happens, then we revert back to your current terms and conditions. So the worst that would happen is you will just, still have your current permit to operate under without this new project added.
Great, thanks. Does anybody else have questions? And if you need some time to digest all of this, totally understand too. We'll have time at the end, so don't feel like we won't be able to go back. Cole, did you have a question?
I do, yeah. On that list you had there, it mentioned change the kind of livestock. If we would change a permit from sheep to cows or cows to sheep, could you then in 2 years or 3 years or even the next year, could you just switch it back again if all parties felt that it was reasonable?
Yeah, and so what you would do through this, I mean, as you're creating the plan, the grazing modification, then you're defining what's going to prompt this modification as well as what's not, right? And so these modifications are available, but not necessary. You could have a bunch of drought modifications available, and drought could exist, and you could say, well, I think maybe I'll just rest it this year instead because, whatever, maybe you have other pasture or other whatever. And so these are opportunities that exist that, that we would collaboratively create, but they should not hamstring you from your abilities of your permit as well.
I see.
And Catherine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just having heard this 3 times, the drought EA works is the action can be applied for the years that is drought plus 1 year. So if, is that correct, Catherine? So if somebody has a new term and condition that was initiated through drought, then there would be 1 additional year that same term and condition could be used.
Correct. And so the analysis was done recognizing that not only the duration of the drought, but like Megan said, that 1 additional year for recovery as well. And so those actions are available. And it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't even have to be a drought on the drought monitor if there are drought conditions present on that landscape, because, like we said earlier, drought is so variable. both vegetative, hydrologic, probably a little more consistent across the landscape, but drought in general is pretty variable across this landscape. And so, recognizing that it's that on the ground confirmation of those impacts that you want to address that would prompt these actions.
Catherine, this is Mindy. I have a question for you.
Sure.
On the partial or full closure, you guys mentioned the wild horse and burro. If you gather them for drought, then you would also close it to livestock until the droughts when recovery occurs. How are you guys addressing that when you're in areas where you're over AML? Because a lot of times an emergency gather for drought for horses is necessary, but livestock have been managed in such a way that the ecological condition could sustain livestock, but because you're over AML, a drought gather is sometimes the only way you can get those horses off.
And actually, if Ellen Shepard is on, I would invite him to field that question, Mindy.
Okay, I can try to. I think the main thing would be is in reality is we're not going to use declare a drought gather as a management tool to remove horses. We're going in order to achieve AML or anything like that. We're going to look at animal condition, vegetation condition, and use and those conditions will determine if a gather needs to occur. We wouldn't be approved for a gather just for by utilizing the drought EA.
Okay.
So in reality, we're going to have to take some action on all the uses if we're gonna remove horses with the drought EAs. I mean, we will seek approval for the gather in regards to the drought itself, and that's usually our supporting need. But we would have to do some action on all uses out there, not just the horses.
Yeah, and I was just thinking when you have, say, 250 horses on a spring in central Nevada that can only sustain 25 horses, and you haven't been able to gather to AML, and now you have a drought and you're losing horses at that spring, but then you turn around and close it to livestock also that probably aren't even using that spring and are further up the allotment, how that's going to be addressed. But just depends, I guess.
It is. It's a case-by-case thing, Mindy, and in the sense of we would be looking at, we should be looking at, is there a pasture fence or something like that would could be used to allow livestock grazing on north of the fence versus south of the fence where the problem water is, things like that. We'd be looking at that. We would be looking for justification, and this is where the asking for non-use really comes into play during drought and other activities where they're just our operators are just not using the all their permit, is to be able to identify, we've got 250 horses sitting on the spring that are in poor condition. We really need to remove them due to that. And this is our supporting criteria. The grazing operator has cut his herd by 50% from what he even asked for, where we can utilize north of the fence for some grazing use in the drought for his livestock in the remaining, some of the remaining AUMs, those type of things. So we really need to be able to go in with all the the positive things of to support any of the removals or any action we take.
Thank you for that, Alan. Laria, I see your hand up.
So I'm gonna chime in on horses. It's important we had decent luck, I think, this last year in advocating for a gather. It's very important that permittees document their actual use or the reductions that they have implemented in response to horses. And we've also had a conservation district that has entered into a cooperative agreement with BLM to do pretty extensive and intensive monitoring with utilization cages and things to show utilization levels and they've done it over time, and the data is pretty telling. And I think we did a pretty good job with that. Now, granted, that herd management area wasn't it didn't have any famous horses in it, so that bears that always plays a role. So if you guys are doing monitoring and submitting your actual use, I think that'll go a long way to help defend why you're gathering, why you're removing, and maybe not closing an allotment to livestock use, or it may not. Sandwash Basin was a whole different experience as compared to Piance East Douglas. So that's just, thought I'd chime in.
So, well, thank you guys. So we do recognize that that horses are certainly an issue worth discussing and are more, they're present in some areas and not in others. So we'll go ahead and move on from the horses right now, but I do recognize the legitimacy of what you guys are bringing to the table with those concerns. And I will just second, if you take non-use due to horses, certainly capture that on your application. And the more that we can tell that story, the more strength we have in that story, it's very helpful. So we'll go ahead and move on to the targeted and prescribed grazing of annual grasses in the Great Basin ecosystems of Nevada. And this is a document that covers 5 of the 6 districts in Nevada. We did not cover Southern Nevada because that is in the Southern Mojave. And so with it being a different ecosystem, different vegetation, different seasonality, it did not fit within our analysis here. And so we're just looking at the Great Basin ecoregions of Nevada. And the whole purpose of this document was to look at how we could use livestock to help address annual grasses, specifically cheatgrass, how we can do that to not only make fuel breaks, but also to make benefits in the landscape in mixed communities, to try to take away some of the impacts that cheatgrass has on those mixed communities. So a variety of ways we can use livestock to address annual grasses in this document. Go ahead, Megan. There are 2 videos that are housed at the location. So Megan, if you go back 1 slide. And then you'll see up at the top there, there's a hyperlink. And I can't remember if we go into that now or later, but those 2 videos are at that hyperlink. So they're not in your hyperlinks that you received from Megan, but they're directly available on that website that you do have the link to. Thanks, Megan. Go ahead. Okay. And so these have a lot of detail. These are during the public comment period of the document creation. And so these have a lot of detail on the document itself if you want to learn more about the specifics of that document. Go ahead. And so some of the most relevant things for you to walk away from this knowing is that we looked at both targeted and prescribed grazing. And I know that those have a variety of definitions depending on, what organization is defining it, or, for this document, for projects that are tiered to this document, we have defined targeted grazing specifically as fuel breaks. And these are done in annual grass dominated areas. And so these are linear features. The reason this is so important is because we are not trying to achieve land health standards on a fuel break. We are creating a fuel break so that we can protect the resource values downwind, right? So targeted grazing is specifically those linear fuel break features. And we do have other components in place. So we're not trying to, lose the soil and degrade those sites, but we have different objectives that we're grazing towards. Whereas prescribed grazing, we are creating these prescribed grazing projects so that they will help achieve land health standards on the site that they are being practiced. And so there's the ability to have, well, we'll get into this more, but that's basically the big difference, pardon, is that targeted grazing is those linear feature fuel breaks in already annual grass dominated areas, whereas prescribed grazing is addressing annual grass in any other context, basically in a way where you're managing towards achievement of land health standards on the location of the project. Go ahead. And so these are the three action alternatives in this document. And this document was done a little differently than many other NEPA documents in the past. And so all three of these alternatives are available. And some of you on this call, I know, were involved as cooperating agencies and others in the creation of this document. So if you have any thoughts that, that were really important to you in this, be sure to share those as we get further in. Alternative one is this early spring grazing. And so that's that short window in time early in the spring when cheatgrass has come up and it's green, full of protein, and our perennial vegetation has not yet come out of its winter dormancy. And so that's a pretty small window of time. And it's also, it varies from year to year, right? It can begin earlier, end earlier. We put March 1st to April 30th, but that is a general time frame. We recognize that, that this would vary year to year depending on what that year brings weather-wise. And so there are also required design features in this document, and we'll get into that more. But basically, those required design features are what allow us to make sure that any of our actions don't have a negative impact. And so for things like if you are creating a prescribed grazing project with early spring grazing, then it might be much more important to remove the livestock directly when those perennials awaken. Whereas if you're doing a targeted grazing project in early spring, then, prompt removal right when the perennials come out of dormancy may not be as important because, because you're not managing for those perennials on your cheatgrass dominated fuel break. Alternative two is the perennial growing season. And so this can be done with targeted grazing if there is, cheatgrass that has come up again since the early spring. You can do targeted grazing during this time. You can also do prescribed grazing during this time, but quite honestly, those required design features to make sure that a perennial growing season prescribed grazing treatment would be appropriate. There's a variety of monitoring that is needed to show lack of negative impacts, as well as, again, those required design features. So it's not necessarily, it's a heavier lift to create a perennial growing season prescribed grazing project that's beneficial, but it's not impossible. However, action alternative 3, the dormant season, and so this is when the perennials are in dormancy during the fall or winter. This is available for either targeted or prescribed grazing, and oftentimes this would be the one where prescribed grazing would see the most benefit, where you're using livestock to remove that cheatgrass biomass layer. So cheatgrass has been shown to actually germinate in that biomass layer above the soil. And so by decreasing that biomass layer, you're decreasing cheatgrass germination, as well as to some degree decreasing the seed bank, but also opening up that area so that the perennials present would be able to get the, the water and nutrient resources instead of the cheatgrass. And so all 3 of these are available, and they don't have to be used separately. So you could have a dormant season grazing project that goes into early spring grazing, or maybe it starts at the very end of perennial growing season and goes into dormancy. These do not have to be mutually exclusive. So there's a great flexibility to be able to create projects according to, the specific objectives and needs on the, each particular allotment and landscape. Go ahead, Megan. And so the way that we did this is Nevada has these ecological site descriptions for the majority of our state. And these ecological site descriptions are based on a variety of factors that define the capability of the site. So soil, elevation, amount of precip, slope, just a variety of things that impact what that site can do. And so we grouped these, recognizing that because a LOMI 8 to 10 does a specific thing and is capable of responding to disturbance in a specific way, that I've just been using pink, but pick a color green. The green over by Carson would do the same to the same treatment as the green over by Elko. And so now we don't have to say, this is the action in this document. We did not analyze the impact of each specific location. Instead, we analyzed the impact to these ecological sites, these groups of ecological sites. And so now we can just say, we know that on a LOMI 8 to 10, this action has this response, and and the project that John Griggs is bringing forward is on a LOMI 8 to 10, and we've shown that to be beneficial. And so that's how this analysis ties together on the landscape. Go ahead. So this does have a project application, and this is fairly long, but it should be, we hope that it is built in a way, the intention was to build this in a way where the questions are kind of sequential and will bring you through that thought process of, observation and, putting your thoughts together so that you can contribute to the most cohesive project development before you even go into the office. And so hopefully that's what you'll find when you use this application. Some of the things I will point out is there's 3 questions up front there. And I want to make sure that everyone that applies for this understands that, this is not a guaranteed thing from year to year, because cheatgrass is not guaranteed. And so we don't know, again, these treatments are specifically to address a cheatgrass concern. And if the cheatgrass has not reached the level of concern that year, then no treatment would be necessary. And so we want to make sure that no one, plans around this as a consistent thing, and that that's, recognized. And then for number 2, we also want to make sure that everyone understands that targeted and prescribed grazing treatments will take more operator input and work than, than your normal grazing management likely would. And so, we want to just be upfront with that and, make sure that people are aware that they're signing on for some extra work. And also then number 3 is to recognize that this is voluntary. So if you don't want to make fuel breaks, we're not going to force you to make fuel breaks, but we have the opportunity to, same with prescribed grazing. And so again, recognizing that this is an opportunity for you, but not an obligation. And we do recognize that the input, both your time as well as if there's water hauling, electric fences, whatever other, components you might need to make the management work. We recognize that there's monetary and time associated with that. And so in order to try to offset some of those expenditures, projects that are applied for through this mechanism are available for free use. And so the AUMs that would be associated with these treatments are available through free use to help try to offset the costs of management of these projects. Go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing, Catherine, that you mentioned in some of the previous meetings too, is that based on conditions, especially related to the fuel break targeted grazing section, if the goal is, to reduce grazing or reduce fuel load down to 500 pounds and the cheatgrass only grew at 700 pounds that year, then the permittee has the ability to say, this is probably not worth time and effort and those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. And so, every year that project would be modified according to what that, what that landscape brings. And so, like Megan said, our goal is to get it down to 500 or 600 pounds per acre. And that is tied to the 2 to 3 inch stubble height as well. And those are the fuel, that is the amount of fuel that, first of all, you have some stubble height left so that you have protection from erosion. So we don't lose all the soil on these sites or get, noxious weed fuel breaks, right? But then also, like Megan said, every year, the amount of implementation of the project would depend on what that cheatgrass brings. And so if we're trying to get it down to 500 or 600 pounds and it only grew to 800 pounds, does it pencil out for the operation to, to put up electric fence or to do water hauling or whatever to try to move 200 pounds per acre? Whereas, on a 2,000 pound per acre year, then that becomes a much more not only useful project for fire potential reduction, but also for the operator to gain benefits from. And so there are monitoring requirements with all of these. I am a very strong advocate of monitoring. I'll get to another slide where I talk about my outcome-based side of my job more, but basically this is what gives us the strength to say that, that we know what we're doing and that we know what the impact of our actions had. And this also allows us to shape our project to modify that every year without having to do a new decision. And so let's say again, a fuel break, we might have a fuel break along, a perimeter fence or something. And we're gonna say, we would put this many livestock for this amount of time on a 2,000 pound production year, but we would put, this many livestock for this amount of time. So we could have the math calculations there to define how we would shape that project on any given year. And then we would just go out and do production and say, oh, we have a 1,500 pound year. Let's go ahead and move forward with a project with, 100 cows for this amount of time. So these are, again, the ways that when we tried to shape them in as simple as we could, we tried to make them observational whenever possible. And on the left there, you will see, we also tried to define whether they would be needed for all grazing projects or just for prescribed grazing projects or just for targeted grazing projects, you know, to try to make that a more simplistic approach to creating these monitoring plans. Go ahead, Megan. Okay, so now we'll get into the decision process, and this is a handout that all of you have, again, in the handouts that Megan sent out with the Zoom link. And so this is basically, this is our non-negotiable time frame. And I'm going to say that there's a 2-month minimum for decisions, and I'll show you why. So we start on the top left there. The first thing we have to ask is, you know, is this action, do we need to immediately do this action in order for immediate resource protection? We have it in the regulations written as, you know, is there irretrievable harm that is likely to happen if we don't take an action, right? And we hope there's not, because that means that things are pretty bad out there, right? But if there is, then this is a pretty high bar for us to write a justification for, but we are able to do what's called a full force and effect decision on the top right there if we do have that situation present. So I just want to mention that that does exist. However, it will not be available anytime that there is a range improvement, temporary water haul, or any, you know, any range improvement available. And it also won't be available, I mean, honestly, the majority of the time, because like I said, you know, we want to be able to address these conditions before we are in that category of emergency, right? And so what will happen is, going down below that top left square, we have our proposed decision. And when we issue that, we have a 15-day protest period. However, that protest period does not start until it starts when each person you know, receives their decision. And so we have 3 attempts or 15 days. And if they have not received it by then we're able to get it back. But you know, sometimes people do not receive their decision until, let's say, day 14, which means that effectively their 15-day protest period doesn't start until 2 weeks after that decision was issued. So that's why I say it's more of a 30-day protest period, because of that 15-day mail time potential. If we go to the right from that proposed decision, then we have no protest and an automatic final decision. And if we do not get a appeal on our final decision, we have a 30-day appeal period. If we do not get an appeal on our final decision, then we go to that right box and we're able to implement, able to add this as a term and condition on the permit and move forward with project implementation on the ground. If we do, however, get an appeal, then we move to that middle right. But first we'll navigate again to the second, the second from the top on the left. So if we do receive a protest to our proposed decision, then we move down to the third box on the left, and then we do need to go ahead and address those protest points. And we put 15 days, it could be more, it could be less, depending on how many protest points and how, you know, how intense they are. So a couple of weeks in general to respond to those protest points, and then we issue our final decision with our protest response. And then we go through our 15-day mailing period again as we mail out our final decision. And so when we mail out our final decision, then again, if we do not get an appeal, then we are able to implement after that 30-day appeal period is up. We're able to add it as a term and condition and implement it on the ground. If we do, however, get an appeal, we most of the time get a stay request as well. And we have 10 days to file a response to that stay request. And then the judge has 45 days to respond to the stay request, and they are able then to deny the stay or grant the stay. If they deny the stay, then that means that we are able to still go forward with that action while we are waiting to go to court. If they grant the stay, then we will not be able to do anything while we are waiting for court. However, what that will mean, and that's the worst case scenario, what will that mean is that you are operating under your current permit while we wait for court. So again, it won't mess up the permit that you have now. It will just not allow you to make these modifications that we had collaboratively developed. So again, from the outcome-based perspective, these are the components that need to be added to the permit. We have achievable and measurable objectives, whether they're objectives for, reducing drought impacts or reducing livestock impacts on drought impacted resources, or whether they're objectives associated with cheatgrass removal. We would include those objectives into your permit along with the monitoring plan associated with that project. A monitoring plan associated with a drought project would likely include the drought indicators that would be, that would be indicative in that area of conditions that would prompt implementation of the drought management plan, right? Whereas the monitoring plan associated with targeted or prescribed grazing would be looking at the cheatgrass components and other resources potentially. If you have prescribed grazing with other resources, then riparian resources or a really important bitterbrush stand for mule deer or whatever it is. But so you'd have that monitoring plan in there as well, and your variety of possible actions. And so I really do want people to think of this as don't just think of the one possible action that might be the best for you this year, but especially if you've been, on that allotment or that landscape for a while, you probably have seen a few different drought scenarios or cheatgrass scenarios come through. And so think of the variety of different things that could be useful. And remember as well that you can do a combination of drought responses or a combination of targeted or prescribed grazing treatments. And so think of those variety of ways that responses could be beneficial. And then, you might only implement one on any given year, but they would all be available. And then those flexible terms and conditions are basically, are you going to be working outside of your on date, off date for this? The AUMs associated with the targeted and prescribed grazing treatments are not, none of these change the AUMs on your mandatory terms and conditions like we looked at before. But the AUMs associated with a fuel break, we call them AUMs just because we're used to calling them that, right? But it's really fuel removal, poundage of fuel removal. And so those AUMs are separate from your permitted AUMs. Annual reporting is really, in my mind, this is the linchpin that makes it all legitimate in the public's eye for us legally. This gives us the longevity of these. And so basically, again, with that billing system becoming sort of a database system as well, we have this annual reporting in there now. So when a permit has these flexibilities, it will automatically prompt this annual reporting, and we will say whatever these flexibilities were for that specific permit. Did we implement these this year? Did we not? What did we see that prompted implementation, and what was the response of the action? So this proves to the American public that we're aware of our actions and their impacts, and that we're having disclosure on those. And this is a really significant legal strength. So these are the components that would be added into your permit specific to any project that would come forward. And that's what would allow then for that to be a perpetually available option whenever those conditions exist that that option was built for. So go ahead. And then we do also have, and this, you know, I'm sure you can all recognize how there can be sometimes that things don't work out as planned, and you are concerned that an approach that you brought forward is not, you know, being given a chance. There is the option, and John Raby has used this very effectively in the minerals program for years now. And so we are bringing it over into the range program for this state director review process. And this is a process that allows for an applicant to file a request for a state director review. And the applicant would submit a written statement of facts to John Raby. And after he receives that statement of facts, then he would conduct interviews with the applicant, with the field office, with, you know, with anyone that he feels has information that would contribute to his understanding of the situation. And then he would issue a statement regarding the finding of the review. And a previous question was the time frame, and John Raby indicated that this would be expected to be about a 30-day time frame for him to go through this process and issue a statement of finding. Go ahead, Megan. So we'll just sum up what we've talked about. And basically, what are the tools? We have environmental assessments. We have those observation forms to help you collect your thoughts on those drought impacts. We have an application for the targeted and prescribed grazing projects. And this wasn't mentioned, but we do also have a monitoring contract at the state office level, where we have the ability to contract out some of this monitoring as well. And so the cooperative monitoring that the BLM and the permittee contribute to is, you know, is absolutely vital as well. But we do have that monitoring contract. I do not want monitoring to be the reason that anyone shies away from a project that's beneficial. And then we talked about what the permittee needs to provide to help expedite these processes. And so again, we talked about you know, the 2-month decision space minimum, but there's about a 3-month you know, project development. And so your contribution to that with the data, the photos, the observations, the you know, you can write out your concerns and opportunities maybe on a map, geospatially depict where these things are, but you know, where do we have more forage, where do we have less forage, where is there good water that we could pipe to, where's there a concern with water diminishing, and then those ideas to address those concerns and opportunities with your drought responses and your project development, and then that reasonable time frame to respond. And then we talked about how you can expect from BLM timely responses and cooperative project development, solution-oriented approach. Go ahead, Megan. Again, that timeline of 4 to 5 months, that 2 months for the decision process, please count on that regardless, but those 2 to 3 months for project development, you know, are the part that you could have the most impact on reducing. And do remember that the first year will be the longest year. And so after you have developed these projects and they are added into the permit, then each subsequent year, it's just basically confirming the need for implementation and, you know, tweaking any piece of it. Okay, how many cows do we put on the fuel break this year? Or, you know, but it's that first year of project development and decision that takes the longest, but those subsequent years will be much quicker. We do have the ability to do these outside of the permit entirely. And so please talk to your range specialist if that is your desire, but we'll probably try to talk you out of it. So, you know, we'll discuss the pros and cons and your concerns. remember that adding this to your permit is not, it does not endanger your permit. The worst case scenario is if these projects get litigated and don't move forward, then you just have to retain your current permit without the project. And so being able to add these as permit modifications would not only expedite it for everyone in the future, but it also adds that in there as a permanent possibility if those conditions warrant it. And I believe that might be the end. Yes. So not a whole lot of time left, but I don't have to run away right at 5. So I guess we can go ahead and open this to additional thoughts, concerns, and dialogue.
Great,
I'll try my video.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Appreciate that. And I know being sick and doing meetings is never fun. So thanks so much for sticking with it. I think everybody appreciates it. And so we'll turn it over to questions. If anybody, Cole, I see you turned your camera on. Do you have a question?
I do. Lots of questions. So how does this prescribed grazing plan apply to areas BLM ground near urban areas that either are not in anybody's or are maybe a part of somebody's permit but never gets grazed? How does an outside company come in there and apply for the prescribed grazing use of this ground?
Right.
My goal is to eventually do 5 breaks around urban areas. I'm already doing it in California and cooperating with some friends of mine, but around Reno, Winnemucca, different areas like that. You know, I want to use my sheep and goats to create fire breaks around residential areas. So there are pieces of BLM ground that never get grazed. So how would that apply to those pieces of ground?
Right. No, that's a good question. And so the way that we approached that in this document was that basically the there was 3 options, because again, this is voluntary. And so we certainly don't want anyone to think that we're trying to put someone else on their allotment, right? But so the way that it can be done is if there is already a permittee on an allotment, then they can apply to do a prescribed or targeted grazing on the allotment that they have a permit on. And if it's a multiple, like if you have 3 other permittees on that allotment, then they all need to buy in to it, you know.
They all need to be in.
And so then if you have a permittee though that might see the benefit of a targeted grazing project, but they don't have the time or energy to do it themselves, but they're like, hey, you know, I know that Cole could do this really well, and they sort of like approve you for it, then we would be able to move forward with it that way. And if it's totally, you know, if there's not a permittee currently on it, then, you know, we'll have to work with you separately about that. That's a few or far between kind of situation.
Sorry.
But I appreciate that, Cole. I think we'd very much like to have, I mean, that's exactly the type of benefit that we can have with livestock created fuel breaks, right? In those urban interfaces and some of the topography that we can't get machines into to do fuels reduction. So
Right.
definitely want to pursue that.
It's in hot demand, and most of the population is in favor of that kind of stuff, you know. And there's oftentimes pieces of private ground that I get jobs on, and then adjacent to it, there's BLM ground that literally never gets grazed by any permittees or anything. And often they're small pieces, they're 40 acres or they're 100
Right.
acres.
And most permittees would not have an issue, I don't think, since these AUMs are separate from, you know, their permitted AUMs. And so if it's an area that they don't use anyhow, and you're doing a fuel break on it, and it's not going to change their management or their use of the areas of the allotment that they usually use, you know, I would expect that there would, you know, be support and buy-in, but
You would expect, yeah, a lot of permittees won't ever think about using it for a million years until somebody else threatens to use it.
but I would encourage that you look through the application and start putting your thoughts on paper, and then certainly contact your office, and I'd be more than happy to join for, you know, for a meeting to start looking at your project specifically.
Cool. We'll do it.
Hey, Catherine and John and everybody there, this is Mindy. I just want to, before I get off, I just want to give you guys a huge compliment. I went through these drought EAs back in 2014, and it wasn't a fun experience. And what you guys have done by adding the idea of addendum to the terms and conditions of the existing permit is a great solution. So my huge compliments to you guys on doing that. Thank you for holding this. We got about 2 feet of snow here, so I think drought discussion always helps our precip value. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thanks, Mindy.
Cole, did you have any other questions?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, great. If anyone else has questions, feel free to turn your mic off or raise your hand, or.
Oh, there's Leanna.
Hi, well, great job. Wow. It seems that I should be able to diligently and carefully avoid an appeal if I follow the verbiage included in the sheets and criteria that you've provided, and carefully have somebody else that would help me review things, and that would prevent the bad guys from appealing my very targeted and prescriptive idea of being a better rancher farmer, actually.
Well, and I think you're on the right track, Leanna. We can't necessarily guarantee we would stop an appeal.
I know.
But I think we're in a strong place to, you know, to win the litigation.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lana. Does anybody else have any questions? And I can make sure to send Catherine's contact information as well. When I send a follow-up email, you'll be getting one more email from me with that feedback form that I talked about at the beginning. We do really want your feedback about the format of this meeting and suggestions for future meetings. I think there's a desire by at least the Bureau of Land Management and Cattlemen's Association and the Department of Ag to do this a little bit more regularly. There's lots of tools and questions and concerns. And so I think, anyway, there's an interest in cooperative monitoring and some other topics. So please feel free. I'll be following up, like I said, with that form. But if you have other ideas and suggestions, we're very much interested in that. Greg mentioned in the chat that he said it was a good meeting, and I'll start working with our range con on a few things. That's great, Greg. I'm glad you found value.
Absolutely.
So one last call, and then I will turn it over to Director Raby to close us out. If not, I'll just say I really appreciate everybody being on today, and I'll turn it over to John.
Yeah, thanks again, Megan. And I want to again big thank you to John Griggs and Nevada Cattlemen's for helping us pull all this together. And of course, I gotta just give a huge thank you to Catherine Dyer for the great work that she's done. Just amazing. And of course, I know she's fighting through some illness there and still was able to power through it like a trooper. And stay with us on this and deliver a great presentation as always. So again, Catherine, just have a lot of respect for the work you've done over many, many years. And it's great to see this coming to a good place where we're at, and seeing that, fruits of the hard labor coming to pass. And so thank you. And thanks everybody who was on the call, and looking forward to seeing some great projects moving forward into the future. And again, until then, take care, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Catherine. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.